When you say that when a parent comes from a place of being centered and being grounded, how do we find that space within ourselves? I know it exists in all of us, but it's so difficult to find that
Oh,
space until and unless it has been practiced enough number of times and we've had that, what you say, connection with it. So, how does someone drop into that space of being centered?
I want to highlight that I am a parent. So this comes from a place of humility as well, that my own children are 20 and 18, and they are polar opposite personalities. I have one son he's just always been very calm, pretty relaxed. He was the climber, explored everything. He's an adventure kid. And then my daughter was much more sensitive to the environments she was in. So she was the one who had, as a toddler, more meltdowns and tantrums and more, instability. And I think that I know you talk a lot about mindfulness. And I felt like as a parent, especially when my kids were young, I think we all have a set point of what feels natural in our bodies. And for myself, my set point was anxious. I was always a little revved up. I didn't sleep well. I was kind of always on the go, multitasking. I had a lot of things going on, and I was therefore quite reactive in my parenting. And when my children would do something that, I didn't feel was appropriate, I was more reactive because I didn't, at that time, I didn't know at all. I didn't have the self-awareness to know that there was another level that my body could go to where I would be able to feel more centered and grounded. I didn't know what that felt like. And as I guide parents and caregivers, teachers, to really be mindful of their own nervous system and to just start to compare when you're in different situations, how does that feel in your body? So I use the concepts of interoception and bringing that awareness to just noticing. Because I think that when we're so busy, we don't even pause to notice what's happening inside our bodies. And that guidance, I think, is what allows parents to just go, oh, this feels better. And then when they can access that different level, all of a sudden everything becomes easier and we find that place of flow. But it's not in a really prescriptive, say this and do a timeout for this long, the behavior approaches that are, more rigid. This had more flow to it, but it came from this place of dropping in. And I can tell you that for a lot of years, I didn't know what that felt like. And that's what I now guide in the adults that I work with, whether they're business owners or parents or teachers.
So it's very important that we learn to first slip into that state of being grounded by being aware, as you said, on a more day-to-day basis, practicing it enough number of times. And when we are more mindful of ourselves, our kids are learning and they're just going to, they're always learning. Many parents ask me, what if my child is neurodiverse, has a diagnosis of autism or SPD? Is that being mindful or being grounded, is that going to help my child? And I'm like, of course. So what's your view about parenting a child? Do you think parenting a child who's neurodiverse is different? It's definitely more challenging, definitely. But how is that different? And what are your views about it?
I feel strongly that in my experience, children who are neurodiverse, when we think about hypervigilance and we think about that feeling of co-regulation, so connecting nervous system to nervous system, I believe that those children are highly attuned to their environment and who they are around. And the things that I would first notice is children would gravitate to certain individuals. And at first we thought, well, they just like that person. But what we are seeing now, and with intention, is that when adults are in that place of what I refer to as anchored, grounded, and their nervous systems are more relaxed, that neurodiverse children, even those who are nonverbal, I talk about the thermostat, right? So the thermostat setting the temperature of the room. And when adults can set the thermostat as calm, safe, regulated, neurodiverse children will match that level because their nervous system feels safe. And when it's not words, it's not, a certain prescriptive approach, but they feel it. And I think we've referred to this in the past as therapeutic use of self. But it really is about regulating the nervous system. And I feel that my greatest learning in being hyper aware of my own nervous system came from neurodiverse children. Children who were nonverbal, because I had to tune in and notice what would happen when I would just calm my nervous system.
Yeah, that's a lovely way of describing it. Kari, what are the signs of anxiety, and in children and in teenagers? How do we identify? What can we do? How can we support our kids? Because anxiety in kids may look like flapping hands, may look like sensory issues. It may also look like, whatever things that we call as sensory issues may really actually be anxiety. So, how do we understand and how do we help?
I think so much of that is tuning in, because when I think about anxiety, I think about that hyperactive base level of the brain, that survival response. And I think for a lot of individuals, we think that anxiety looks like being afraid, looks like being worried. And in some children, it shows up like that. In some children, it shows up as hyperactivity, where they're always on the move. They're exploring different things, but it's in this hyper aware state where they can't really sink into play and they can't really slow their bodies down to be able to really learn and to connect with others. So it can look like hyperactivity. I think the most misunderstood style that I have seen is children who are really controlling, that we feel that they're being manipulative or they want all the control. And what I know about trauma informed practice, about anxiety, is that children learn to calm their own anxiety by creating their own boundaries. When things are predictable, it allows our nervous system to relax. And there's no better way to relax a nervous system than to just control everything, because then it is ultimately predictable. And I think that sometimes we feel that if we take control or we take away all of the control that the child has, that you can't have choice, that this is the way that they will learn to give up that control. And what often happens is the child gets even tighter and they hang on even more to control, or they may explore lying, or because they're trying to keep themselves safe. So I think the most misunderstood is that element of being controlling and manipulative. And I think certainly in our teens, that's how more of that anxiety just demonstrates itself. And in some of my teens, it demonstrates as withdrawal, where they're just kind of pulling away from others and they're feeling like no one understands. They may be kind of cocooning themselves. So it's a lot. There's no kind of one way that anxiety shows up, but I think being aware, observing, asking the appropriate questions. Has there been a change? Is this kind of part of the personality? Is this anxiety? Or is this just a stage that they're going through that we can navigate together? And I think so much of that is just that conscious observation and giving space.
So you feel giving them space and making them feel safe is the key way to help them with anxiety, and other strategies to, of course, work on the body, because that's another big thing. I'm sure we cannot discuss everything in this, but what I get from you is giving them space and creating giving them safety, right? Cues of safety from us.
Yes. And I think that when I say space, what I mean almost is a buffer. So we don't want to just, kind of ignore and say, oh, well, they'll work it out and they just need space and time. We still want to lean in, but it's in a way of just, again, being that anchor, being that stability to just be curious. What's going on? How are you feeling? What's happening? And I come back to that concept of interoception and mindfulness because I think that a lot of our children, and I think it's something we're being more aware of in this generation than we ever have. I know I didn't learn about mindfulness or how my body felt when I was a child. It was just, this is what you need to do, right? You act the right way, you do the right things, and then you're rewarded for that. And I think that for a lot of our children, they're just learning. They want to do the right thing. They want to feel better. They want, to reach that goal or to make that friend or to earn those grades, but they don't know how. And in the past, they've learned things like, oh, I just need to try harder. I just need to pay attention. But then trying harder and trying to pay attention is just not as easy as it seems. And when they learn how to tune into their own nervous system and just notice without judgment, how does this feel in my body? And noticing that I use a lot of techniques such as breathing and sensory regulation strategies, certain types of movement, lifting heavy things, using linear repetitive movement, and in ways that have relevance, right? So that may be exercising for one person, that might be walking in nature for another, and it might be doing crafts or knitting, but that repetitive motion, and then noticing when I do that thing, it allows my nervous system to feel different, which then allows me to pay attention or allows me to be less hypervigilant of my surroundings. And when we start to kind of show children, how do we get there? I think for me, they really light up because it's often the first time they've experienced that sense of, oh, I know now how to do that without just feeling like I need to try harder or that something's inherently wrong with me. So a lot of the strategies I use are very body-based strategies, and then combined with the awareness.
Yeah, I have used a lot of auditory based strategies, and one of them, I mean, I use many, but I have seen the safe and sound protocol also having a great impact on kids because it really helps them to fall into that space of feeling safe, and huge changes there. And I love so many, there are like so many ways to help a child and feel more safe. So thank you for sharing them. So I read that you work not just with the child but the family. Why do you feel it's important to work with the family and not just the child?
I think all of us, we exist in relationship. As human beings, that's where we find our value. It's where we contribute to community. It's where we grow. And when we focus only on an individual and we don't consider environment, and an environment can be physical, but we also have a social environment that includes culture, beliefs, values, history. And when we consider the whole view, this is where I believe greater change happens, because when we focus on an individual, our ability to create change is limited to that one situation. And what I would see in my practice was that children would do things in one way while they were in session, while they were with me, but then those same things didn't translate into home or to school. And now I've realized that when we support the family, not only with strategies, but also with understanding, that they then see the child's behavior, they see their actions from a different lens and a different perspective, which I think creates more understanding. And then that child can take the session time, the things, the strategies we learned in sessions, and apply them and feel supported in the greater community. And I think the generalization happens much more effectively when we support the social environment that's around the child.
Beautiful. It's like, seeing the child as a whole, not just the body, not just the mind, but seeing the body mind connected and seeing the child being connected with the family. So I love that approach.